Creating a score center in SoftChalk Cloud can be done very quickly. We first log into the SoftChalk Cloud and then go to the Score Center. We should already have content ready to be placed into the Score Center. We then select My Score Centers. This will allow you to then create the Score Center. Notice on the right-hand side of the screen, we see Actions. We want to click on Create Score Center. We now give the Score Center a name. I'm going to call this Score Center my Math 101. I could then give instructions to the students, and the instructions will be displayed to the students when they access the URL that we either send to them or make available in some method. Once we enter the instructions, we then go to the Authentication tab. The Authentication tab allows you to choose how you're going to allow the users of your lesson and Score Center to identify themselves. You can allow the users to select any identifier they choose. That may or may not be a bad idea. If the user enters a different name for each one of the lessons in your Score Center, then there will not be a child record for that student. What I like to do is to allow specific user identifiers. So I'm going to select that. I'm then going to look at the rest of the screen here, and this will allow me to add the identifiers that I want to be able to access my content. What I usually do is just create a student ID that I'm going to email to each one of my students. They then would use that ID to access the content in this particular Score Center. These identifiers can come from an Excel worksheet, they can come from a text file, lots of different ways, or we can just type them ourselves. Once we enter the identifiers, we then click on the plus sign to move them over and make them part of our Score Center. If we would like to, we also have the ability to add a password for access to our Score Center. This would be the same password that each person would then use. If you would like to, you also have the ability to select an IP range. For example, if you're going to allow students to access the content in a computer lab, then those computers would have a specific IP range that you could then enter. Finally, you can also add dates that you want to make sure that your students access your content by. And you could put in a starting date and also an ending date. And it could be whatever you would like it to be. To add the date range, we just click on the starting date, choose the starting date we'd like to use, then click on the ending date, and again select when the lessons should be ended. We then click on the Add Date Range. Once we've finished with our authentication, we then can decide who else will have the ability to see progress the students are making in the lesson. If you are team teaching, then what you may want to do is add the other members of your team to the users list. Those users would be valid SoftChalk Cloud users. So we would enter their username and then click on the plus sign to include them. Finally, we're ready to track the lessons that we want to have in our Score Center. We select a single lesson by clicking. If we would like to include multiple lessons from our My Lessons list, then we just hold down on the Control key if you're using a PC, or the Command key if you're using a Macintosh, and choosing that particular lesson. If you make a mistake and you include one too many, just hold down on the Control key and click on that lesson once again. Once you have all of the lessons selected, you then click on the Move button, that's the arrow going to the right, to indicate that these will be the lessons that you are tracking. You can come back later on and add more lessons to this list. Once you have done that, you then click OK, and you have now created your ScoreCenter. Once we see the ScoreCenter, we'll see the two lessons ready for our students to access. You'll notice that it shows us that we are hosting, or the lessons are stored in the SoftChalk cloud. We can see the average score for all of our students, how many points each lesson is worth, how many attempts have been made on the lesson, and how many learners or different learners have accessed the lessons. We can also go to the grades by clicking on the little grade book, and it will then show us the scores for that particular lesson. Now you'll notice what we can do with our actions for our grade book is we can change the grade or the scoring method. If we click on that, rather than it having their last attempt being stored in the grade book, we can actually make it their first attempt, or the highest attempt, or even their average. Now I'm going to choose highest attempt and click on Change Grading Method. Once I've changed the grading method, I can also change the maximum number of attempts I want my students to have for this particular lesson. I can let it be unlimited or make it a value from 1 through 10. I then change it, click on the Change Maximum Attempts, and I've now modified the actions or how that ScoreCenter works for that particular lesson. Let's go back into our ScoreCenter again. I can click on the name of the ScoreCenter to get there. Now let's look at our gradebook for the second lesson. And once again, we have the ability to change the grading method, the number of attempts for that particular lesson. When students do take the lesson, this is where we'll be able to see the number of points each student has earned. We'll then be able to drill down and see how they have answered each of our questions. Clicking back on my ScoreCenter will take us back to the ScoreCenter list.